This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, beautiful sunny Friday morning, nearing the middle point of the day right now. I've been up since about 5:30, went to bed quite early, probably went to sleep at about 10:30. And so when my baby son let out a brief wail this morning at 5:30 and stirred me, that was it. I guess I've been asleep for 7 hours at that point, so there's no real likelihood of falling back asleep again. So headed downstairs. And it's this weird thing where I would really appreciate sleeping later. I'd really appreciate the opportunity to sleep till 7 or even later. But when I get woken up early, and it's early enough that I know that I could squeeze in a movie, there is a little bit of excitement there, a little bit of like, all right, okay. If I feel like I've got a fairly decent amount of sleep under my belt, heading downstairs and watching a movie on my own without any interruptions is a great silver lining to have for this erratic sleep of being a parent to young children. So headed downstairs and fired up Hiroshima, Mon Amour, which, as I've mentioned to you recently, I'm on a bit of a attempt to tackle the French New Wave. I'm interested in watching Richard Linklater's movie that's coming out later this year, Nouvelle Vague, which is about the making of Breathless, and I think just about the French New Wave scene and all those directors. I don't really know what's going to be the content of that film, but I love Linklater, and Linklater, like most of my favorite directors, loves the French New Wave, and I've never really connected with it. So just trying to watch a bunch of films from that era and see if I can crack that nut, if I can develop an appreciation for why that's so important to so many people. Now, I started this sort of project by watching Bob Le Flambeur, which is sort of a pre-French New Wave movie. I probably should have done more of that. I probably should have watched more 50s French movies, and maybe I will. Now, on film number 2, I've jumped to Hiroshima, Mon Amour, which I think is more considered to actually be a French New Wave flick. It's a movie I've seen before, so I kind of felt maybe like I already watched it, I already liked it, so watching it again would be kind of it wouldn't be that challenging. And that's kind of my main reason for wanting to ease into this gradually, is I just want to not put myself in a position where I'm watching something that I just don't have any kind of ability to appreciate. Whereas this one was kind of an easier task because I think I've watched it in the last 5 years or so, and that's kind of my draw to it right now. I think after this, I probably will go back and watch a few more 50s movies, like kind of maybe mid 50s or something. We'll see how I get on. But anyway, watched this morning. Had a bit of a different experience with it than I was anticipating. Had a bit of a different experience with it than I remember it. Like everything in this film, when I see it, I remember it. But if you kind of boil it down to what my sort of takeaway memory of the film was, weirdly, I think it wasn't as focused on the war and on politics and stuff like that. Not to say that I'd forgotten that element of it, because it is, it resonates through every scene in the movie. But I think my takeaway years later was a more human story akin to Before Sunrise or something like that, but that it was definitely thematically, it contained the bombing of Hiroshima and the Second World War, but in my head, the memory of it was that it was a more human story about those two characters. And yeah, my experience with it today was very, very different. Anyway, just sort of to talk through the film from its beginning, it starts off with a lengthy sequence that's very impressionistic. I think the director, who, if I'm not mistaken, is Alain Resnais, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think he had made documentary films before this. I think he had worked as an editor on other kind of early French New Wave movies as well. So, and I could be wrong about, I haven't done any research in this because I kind of like to, when I watch a movie, send you a voice note to sort of dump out my initial thoughts before I've kind of read any background stuff that would inevitably color my interpretation of the film. Just get that bottled up, and then what I'll probably do after this to kind of deepen my understanding of the film and where it's coming from, what like kind of why it was important, what in this film was so transformative. I'll dive into research after this, but yeah, I don't know a huge amount about this director. Well, that's an understatement. I know basically nothing about this director other than you hear his name a lot in this family of directors like Godard and stuff that are associated with French New Wave. So I'm assuming that he was one of the ringleaders and one of the most important directors. But anyway, the beginning of the film, and it feels like a long time. I don't know how long it actually is. It feels like it's about 20 minutes or something. Could be shorter, could be longer, I'm not sure, but it starts very impressionistic with this voiceover with the main actress, who I'm reading her name now, Emmanuelle Riva, phenomenal actress, gorgeous, classic movie star type character, talking to, I believe, the other main actor in the movie, Eiji Okada, Japanese guy. I mean, that's my interpretation of who the two disembodied voices are. And it's just her going, I remember this in Hiroshima, I remember that in Hiroshima, I remember the hospital, I remember this, and him saying, you don't remember that, you didn't see that, you weren't there, kind of thing. And that, it goes on for a long time. As I said, it's impressionistic. We're just seeing a montage of different shots of Hiroshima, of the aftermath of the nuclear bomb being dropped. And both this morning and a few years ago when I first watched the film, I remember feeling more or less the same way about that, which was, this is a very perplexing and challenging and kind of distancing way of starting what will ultimately, for the rest of the film, be like a much easier film to watch. But those opening 20 minutes, of course, it's horrific and it is very affecting. It's very unusual and shocking to see that level of gore. And I mean, it's not special effects makeup you're looking at. You're looking at the absolute worst horrors of human history. Like literally unflinching camera documenting these horrors, and it is really shocking. So it's not that that first 20 minutes of the film is unaffecting, but it is somewhat mystifying to me. I, like a number of things in this film, don't understand it. Like, I don't know what is happening here. She's saying that she remembers this stuff. He's saying you don't remember that stuff. There's ways that you can interpret that, like that I can just sort of, that I naturally would be inclined to interpret it, but I don't necessarily feel confidence that that is the way I'm supposed to interpret it, nor do I feel confidence that there is a way that I'm supposed to interpret it. Maybe it's supposed to be perplexing. And in a way, it kind of is a good way of starting things off, because it's so much of the film is obtuse and is, how do you interpret this? But because it's so long, and because the rest of the film is much more human and much more easy to engage with, like a film like Before Sunrise or whatever, or Brief Encounter, which came to mind a lot, because it's so arty and hard to kind of pin down that opening 20 minutes. It's a strange way to enter the film. Now, the film is about a foreigner in Hiroshima, or at least that's one way you could look at this film, because I think there's other valid interpretations. But if you look at it as a film about a French woman in Hiroshima with a Japanese man shortly after the war, I think this would be about 15 years after the bomb dropped, then you could say that this opening dialogue in the first 20 minutes of the film is kind of trying to evoke someone saying that they have experienced, that they can feel and understand and wrap their head around the trauma of the bombing of Hiroshima, and another person saying that they aren't capable of doing that. Again, not saying that is the correct interpretation or the only interpretation, but that's one way to enter the film. And then the rest of the film plays out. And obviously I think if you just strip away any allegorical stuff, anything about France and Japan and the war and stuff like that, and you just look at it as like a base level story of two humans, and I'm not saying you should do that, and I'm not saying you can do that, but just purely as a kind of exercise to talk about the film and its merits as a again, Before Sunrise-esque story, or it really reminded me of that Duplass movie, Blue Valentine, I think it was called, of like two people meeting up for 24 hours or 36 hours or whatever. It's like a very brief section of time, and having fun and romance and stuff, but also grappling with all of their life trauma. It's if you look at it as that, if you look at it as that, but if you just consider it on those terms alone, it's very compelling. Both actors are really good, particularly her. She's got more to do, but they're both really good. They've got something I love, which is when you see actors who are both doing the movie star thing and the actor thing. If that's probably the worst way I could put it, but they have to do really intense, nuanced, dramatic acting, but they also have to have this sort of sex appeal and lighting up the screen, old school movie star appeal as well. And they managed to do, both actors do both really, really well. I've traveled a lot myself, and I've got a lot of this experience of like the lady in this film, where you're just on the other side of the planet. You're so removed from where you are. You're in a transient moment. We know that she's about to jump on a plane back to Paris the next day, and you connect with someone in the most intimate way, where there's such a void between you in terms of life experience, culture, the individual pressures that you respectively are subject to, and you're maybe never going to see them again, and you've never seen them before, and that your understanding of each other is limited. But there's an opportunity there for a greater degree of intimacy and a greater degree of communion and sharing than you might ever have with the people that you've known your whole life, or that you know are your best friends or whatever, because it's sort of like a therapist office type situation, but it's not a therapist office in the sense of like a very removed and structured dynamic. It is social interaction or romantic interaction, but it's an opportunity to really go deep on things that are your primary life struggles, because there's no real fallout to it. This woman, I think, from the beginning, is sort of adamant that she's never going to see this guy again. So that's really interesting. So if you play it out as like actual personal trauma, and obviously she has the great central trauma of her life is that she fell in love, like so many young women did, with a Nazi soldier. So many women across France and Holland and countries like that, where, well, I'm a young girl in a town, and here's a young man also in the town. I mean, he might be a Nazi soldier, but obviously not like he actually has any vested interest in Hitler or like the philosophies or anything of that. He's just, happened to be born a few hundred kilometers east of me, and we connect. And I think that happened a lot. And she falls in love with him, and then, like happened to so many of those situations, the fallout is that he gets killed and she gets her head shaved, and she gets this trauma of we've learned at the beginning of the film that she's been like connecting with lots of other men and having these encounters throughout her adult life, but she has had the love of her life ripped away from her in the most traumatic way possible. And so she's working through that. And again, I'm taking out any allegorical stuff from the movie just to speak about it as like two people interacting. And then he's gone through this thing of like, obviously he's gone through the war, and he wasn't in Hiroshima when the bomb dropped. All his friends and family were, I'm sure a huge amount of his community and family and stuff would have perished in the bombing. And he's been a soldier through the Second World War, which would have been traumatic and nightmarish as well. And now they're just two people. And again, this is so soon after the war, and that's why watching some of these films now is really hard to appreciate. Like I think it's borderline impossible for me to appreciate Hiroshima, Mon Amour, because just thinking about how recently these events, like the liberation of France, which resulted in the killing of her partner, her like soulmate, love of her life, and the bombing of Hiroshima, which resulted in, complete change to his city and life. That if we put that in like contemporary terms, that's like if those things had happened in 2010. Like if those things had happened to us in 2010, they would be just dominating every fiber of our being. And for the people watching this film, like going to the cinema, getting some popcorn, getting a Coke, buying a ticket, sitting down, they're looking at like the fallout and aftermath of stuff that happened in 2010 to them, as I'm saying that as us stood here in 2025 now. So it is impossible to appreciate what went into making this film and what went into watching this film, because everyone that made this film and everyone that watched this film at the time was working through the trauma of going through World War II, however that played out for you as an individual. And we see two people who've had very different experiences within the war, but like it can't be understated how much or how necessary, I think, how either cathartic or just inevitable arts like this would be in 1959 when it was released. Whereas when we watch it now, it's more just like thematically interesting, and we've got so much removed from it that it's a very different experience. Saying that, I'm watching this now whilst a genocide is going on, and when I'm seeing the pictures and images, real pictures and images in this film of kids and bodies ripped apart and everything like that, and then I'm sort of considering that culture clash aspect of this film, where you've got someone who is walking through Paris on a sunny day while the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and then another guy whose entire family was being destroyed, and everything and everyone he loves being destroyed, and like that is a concept that unfortunately is evergreen. This thing of, where we live, for example, we can pop down to Tesco's, get talking to someone, and they've recently come out of Syria or something like that. And that intermingling of people who are horrified by what's going on in the world and might be touched to it and might be somewhat educated on it, mingling with people who were the actual victims of it, is something that I do think about a lot. So that's not something that was uniquely 20th century or World War II or whatever. So the film both has lots of stuff in it that is as present today as ever, and then lots of stuff in it that is like very specific to the time. And that brings me on to the kind of allegorical stuff. So as I'm watching this film, especially this viewing, I don't think it was as loud a part of the experience last time around, but as I'm watching this film now, I'm flip-flopping back and forward between taking the events of the film literally and taking the events and even the characters themselves as allegorical. So sometimes I'm watching the film and going like, this is an actress who's shooting a film in Japan and has met this guy and they're having a little affair and are a deep connection, and they're going to spend, a day or two kind of hanging out and talking to each other. Sometimes I'm watching it on those grounds. Other times I'm watching and go, she is France and he is Japan, or she is Nevers or whatever the town she's from, and he is Hiroshima. And this is Nevers working through its trauma and Hiroshima working through its trauma. And they're not real, literal people. They are two cultures, like not nationwide cultures, but citywide cultures, grappling with their inescapable trauma. And sometimes I watch it and I go, she is a French woman from this town in Nevers who has gone to Hiroshima as part of her endless, lifelong attempt to escape from her demons. And he isn't real. He is Hiroshima. And she is, wherever she goes, you could put another man in. She mentions that she has slept with lots of different men and stuff, that like they are all these men are places that she's going to run away. And there's a scene towards the end of the film where they're sat in the airport almost beside each other on a row of benches, but there's an old lady sitting between them, and the old lady talks to the Japanese guy, and it's the first time, and I believe the only time in the film, that someone acknowledges the existence of that Japanese guy. And I was like, oh, does that kind of break apart that theory? Because up until now, he could literally just be a mirage or whatever, like when we see her talking to him about her traumas that she's gone through, it is just her sort of meditating on those traumas. And this all the ability to read into this film in many different ways is kind of strengthened by the fact that characters very often talk they talk as other people. Like, for example, she'll be talking to the Japanese guy and then he'll go, I was dead when you found me. Like, he's talking as the German soldier. He slips it. It's not like he goes, I'll be him. Like, there's no role play that's kind of seems to have naturally emerged. It's just, that's what people are saying. She'll start talking as someone else often. And again, the opening 20 minutes of the film is very vague and like open to interpretation. And I, again, haven't looked into this film at all, so I suspect that when I look into it, at the very least, I'll find like common readings of the film, if not intended readings of this film. At the moment, I'm just enjoying the how is this film, if you don't have it defined, if you're looking at it more as it's very clear what this film is about, right? Like whether this person is real or that person is real or this is supposed to happen. Like if you throw all that out the window, it doesn't in any way sort of chip away at the clarity of what are the themes of this film. It is about trauma. It is about World War II. It's about culture clash. It's about Hiroshima. It's got so much rich texture. It's beautiful. The camera work is amazing. I believe it was the first non-documentary film, if I'm not mistaken, from Resnais. So that's, again, just like really impressive. The acting is great. The whole, like, you get a great film even if you don't fully understand it. And first time I watched it, I think again it was more of a romantic film to me, less of a sad film. Watching it now this time, it's like a pretty bleak movie, but it also sizzles with energy because of this classic. You get the love interests on screen together, you have them talking and stuff. There's a lot there, but it's broken people, like, and then that's why it evoked Blue Valentine. Anyway, I had a good time with it. I'm having a good time living with it, thinking about it. I kind of, again, feel like maybe I should have pumped the brakes and gone a little bit, because I believe this is a very sort of totemic, important French New Wave movie. And maybe I should have dipped my toe in a little bit more rather than going into the deep end. But it's not hard to watch, and it's not like a film that's like boring anyway. Like that's my big fear with the French New Wave, is like hitting upon a film where I'm like, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm watching it, but it's not doing anything for me. So I want to avoid that. And I think, yeah, I've managed to dodge that so far. So I'm going to have a little investigation now, see what this Alain Resnais cat is up to, what other films he's done, and yeah. Let me know what you think of this.
Hey man, just on my work break here now, outside the office. Thought I'd send you a voice note in response to your voice note on Hiroshima, Mon Amour. I've never started a voice note and been so unsure of what I was going to say. And it might even be the case that I end up sending you multiple voice notes as I try and put together my thoughts, I suppose. I really enjoyed listening to your theories and you grappling with it and the various suggestions you had. And like you, I go into a film and talk about a film, especially in the context of a voice note to you, as blind as possible in terms of the context and even reading anything, because like you, I want to go in as non-corrupted, at least in my own initial thoughts, as possible. And like you suggested, or can't remember what you said, but I'd be lying if I said I ever thought I got a handle on a lot of the things that happen in this movie. And I'm not talking about the fact that a couple, well, not a couple, it's a one-night stand, and on the surface of what plays out, of course, I've got a handle on that. But I could not say with any confidence that I formed a full opinion on anything I was seeing. So it was sum up this movie in one experience. In a few lines, I would say I enjoyed trying to work it out, and it was well acted and beautiful to look at. It was shot absolutely beautiful. Obviously, there's the horrific images in the beginning of the movie. So I think one of the reasons why I struggled with this interpretation of what was going on is this movie, in a way, even now, I think it was made in 1961 or 1960, I can't remember. Even now, it seems like I'm struggling to find cinematic reference points both after this movie was made, and that's a hell of a long time, that's 60 something years, and before this movie was made. Because I remember we watched Bob Le Flambeur. Sure, that's not how it's pronounced. Bobby Flam Flam. And one of my problems with it was that it felt a very primitive version of stuff that I was used to, and that was much more refined, much more further explored, and just going back to the blueprint of something like that. Well, I appreciated it from a film perspective. Academically, I struggled just from a viewer experience. Now with this it was a much more enjoyable struggle. Well, sirens there gone off. It was a much more enjoyable struggle this time because I couldn't really compare it to anything. And that's a hell of a thing to say for a movie that's so old. And I know you mentioned before Sunrise and whatnot, and I guess you can compare it to lots of things in one sense, but just in terms of, oh, this is where this comes from, this is what it's trying to do, and this is what's come later. I didn't think I had anything to really fully compare it to, and that was nice. It was nice to see something feel so fresh. And the film opens with kind of juxtaposition of two lovers intertwined, and even how that's showing is almost mangled passion, I suppose, is one way of describing it, because we see elbows, we see bits of back, I think we see like arms and shoulders, just not the traditional lovers in bed scene that you would get. And anything that I'm going to say, take it with a pinch of salt, because fuck knows how far or close I am to any mark, and it could be absolutely nothing. But yeah, I like seeing the way their body was staged, and then we get a kind of what The Godfather would do almost, where they're doing their vows and there's all this horror stuff happening and hits and people getting killed in Godfather. But in this, it's two lovers talking in bed. We don't see their faces, we just hear their voices, and it's a very interesting display of their bodies. And then that's cut with horrible footage of Hiroshima. And she says that essentially along the lines of that, I know it was like I was there, and she's describing it almost in a present tense. And I don't know if it was my subtitles, and I hope it wasn't my subtitles, but a lot of the dialogue in this takes place in the present tense. And I think this movie has a lot to say about memory and how I think acting out the dialogue of things that happened in the past in the present sense was a great way of showing that you can take memory with you, and even though it happened in the past, it's so current emotionally. So the bodies of the two lovers conveys such an intimacy, such an intertwined state of being in their passion and their connection, in a way that, which we eventually find out was a one-night stand, it's not really seen before, how it manages to capture two people coming together and feeling something. And then when we get the footage of Hiroshima, obviously it's real footage, I presume. Then you wonder how much is imagining something in your memory that you couldn't actually see, but you could feel. And obviously, as you stated, this movie was filmed very closely after the war, and the two characters have experienced the effects of war as well. So how much does imagining the horrors in a different setting, because she's seen her fair share of horrors in France, how much does that impact your psyche as if you did experience it? Because you weren't there, but you definitely felt the ramifications of it. And even though you weren't there, does that count as experiencing it? And she's asked later on in the movie, actually, what did Hiroshima mean to you? And she said, the end of the war. And I often have this conversation with my partner, because she is very empathetic and she believes in empathy in its purest sense, being able to experience something that someone else has experienced. And I don't really believe in that. And the example I always give, which is a bit extreme, to give you an insight into my household. So I'm held at knife point in real time, and then I'm having that conversation, and I'm feeling it, and then I'm having that conversation with somebody else, and they said, "Oh yeah, I was held at knife point too." I mean, I don't know how I'd be able to have this conversation while held at knife point, but I guess the exercise of this is, when you're in the moment, you have extra stimulus, an extra fear, an extra level of something, that just because the same thing happened to somebody in the past doesn't mean they can empathize in the sense that they feel it, because they're missing the stimulus of the moment with lots of things. Now, that doesn't really make allowances for the fact that trauma can re-trigger something in real time, so that it does feel like you're experiencing it right now. So yeah, I really liked grappling with that as much as liking grappling with some horrible time in history you can actually do. But I like studying people and what makes them tick, and trying to unravel what their experiences are. And the other thing about this movie as well, as you rightly said, you said that we couldn't possibly know what this film would mean to people watching it in 1960. Certainly someone like me and you couldn't, but as you said, I guess people, as they watch this in Syria or Palestine, they would know all too well what that feels like. But just from a filmmaking point of view, never has something so far away felt so, I don't know if maybe vibrant isn't the word, but there's a scene where they're walking through a crowd and people are holding up signs about Hiroshima, and it just felt, you could feel the energy of that scene. And probably that is, I don't know if that's real footage or staged, and they just shot it while it was happening, but yeah, you could just really feel the energy around the history of that time, probably because it captured a lot of it in real time. But that translated to my experience as a viewer in a way that something in a history book could never do. And funny enough, because we're following these characters as a focal point, and also translated in a way that a documentary couldn't. To just something that's about seeing these two characters interact with this environment that made something that happened so long ago to us feel very much alive in the moment. I thought that was an achievement of the movie as well. With regards to the relationship between the two characters, it's funny because you don't know the situation to begin with, and they're just having a conversation in the hotel room, and then you find out it's a one-night stand, and the Japanese actor, for one, is saying he never felt like this. This feels like love, and he's almost trying to convince her to spend more time with him, and she is reluctant because of how much time they'll actually spend together, because she's flying back to France, I think, the day after. So there's this type of courtship that I found quite charming and quite intimate to begin with, and then you find out that, all right, they're both married, and not to say I judge characters morally when I watch movies, that's not my objective, but let's just say if you're watching a movie about two friends setting up a business and they're really enthusiastic, they've worked all their life to set up a business, and then you find out through the events of the movie that one of the friends actually has been stealing from the business fund, and then the movie just continues on and not really pass a judgment on it. It does change how you perceive the business relationship between two friends. So in this situation, once you find out that they're both married, it did change how I perceived the romance. This wasn't so much a lightning in the bottle thing that could happen, really, even more so than their geography doing them. But it also feels like, okay, this romance now has been used as an almost break from your own lives, and it's easy, the fantasy of something against the weight of reality being used to escape from and feeling more powerful than it actually is in some ways, but in other ways it probably is really powerful, because you mentioned it's a bit like therapy when people be in a bubble and there's no stakes to this in terms of the ramifications for their life, especially if they're going to lie to their partners or whatever, but there's no ramifications to confessing the deepest parts of your soul if you're not going to see that person the next day at work or the next day in your household. There's a freedom to it, and there's a type of liberation to it, and I think that's really interesting to explore. You said therapy. I feel like it's almost like a confessional is a better way of putting it in many ways, because you really feel like you almost need to be absolved from the way you think, and you're getting some type of absolution from even uttering this to another soul. And I don't know if you mentioned Blue Velvet or Blue Jay, because not Blue Velvet, Blue Valentine, because Blue Valentine is the film with Ryan Gosling, and Blue Jay is the one with Sarah Paulson and Mark Duplass. That's in black and white, and he goes back to the hometown and they run into each other. So I don't know which movie you're talking about, because number one, I haven't seen Blue Valentine, but if it's Blue Jay, then you said Blue Valentine. But anyway, The other aspect I liked about this as well, and this kind of goes back to memory as well. So with their relationship that's just happened over one night, you learn that she's had many one night stands and she's fond of men, as she says, and this isn't particularly unusual for her. But I would say that it is very unusual for her in one sense, and I think she feels something that she hadn't felt before that reminds her of her previous lover. And now that she's starting to feel similar feelings with this guy, not only has it reminded her of her former lover and spiraled, it's almost like the beginning of forgetting him. And I think the Japanese actor says he almost labels what this memory will be in the future in real time, because he's already, even though a lot of this dialogue is talked in the present, there's moments where characters talk about this encounter that's happening right now in the past, which I found fascinating as well, because he says, oh, I think when I look back at this encounter, I'm going to think of this as the tragedy of forgetting or something like that. And I think she's having a big problem with her feelings right now, because she's already been forgetting the German lover's eyes. She's already been forgetting his voice. But now she's perhaps erasing the feelings of love and it getting taken over with new love for this guy. And I think that's one thing that she's freaking out about. And there's a voiceover where she's talking in the present that I am in the cabin, I am in love, and she's talking about the German lover. And the flashbacks in this are also very interesting because they don't feel like flashbacks. I hate flashbacks, but the flashbacks in this feels like pockets of memory, I think is a good way of looking at it. And when they show up on screen, it doesn't really feel like, oh, here comes the flashbacks. It just feels like something that's being accessed from her memory. But obviously, every memory is a memory of a memory. And so you're so far away from the actual event and what it actually looked like. That's almost like a copy of a copy of a copy. And the flashbacks in this movie feel like that. And it's a shame in years to come that once a flashback happens, it just totally kills the momentum of a film. This complements her emotional state rather than gives exposition on an emotional state, which we would get a lot more in movies that continue. So there's all that going on, and I don't know if I even want to know, or if there is an actual read of what this movie is trying to say, because I think one of the pleasures of it is trying to work it out. And she also says a line in the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie of that, I can't remember what she's saying exactly, but she's talking about how an experience with a person can deform you, can change you, can love you. And I think that goes back to how the bodies that we see of the two lovers and the camera shots, how they've literally changed each other in some way from this interaction. Now, talking about the allegory type of things, I hear you, and I like your reading of it. I would be lying if I said that I had that had that experience while I was watching it, but I suppose again, you're watching it for a second time, so you already know where it ends. But there's definitely some evidence for him almost not existing and being an allegory, especially in the scene where she's sitting down and this other guy comes over and said, "Are you alone?" And he's just standing in the distance or sitting in the distance. And he follows her for about 20 minutes and she keeps on losing him and he keeps on coming back like a ghost almost. There's something very ghostly about him in the final scenes of the movie. But I feel like that also could be looked at in terms of memory. And she's already starting to distance herself from the encounter, and she's already starting to forget the experience of him, and she's almost trying to picture him. I don't know. And there's this other whole element as well of that this horrible thing happened in Hiroshima very recently, and what's she there to do? She's there to make a movie about Hiroshima, I presume. I think she's a nurse or something in it. And that's crazy. And that says something about what we also do with memories as well. We want to create a narrative around it and put it on the big screen and tell stories. And I think, again, my subtitles could be wrong, but I feel like a lot of this dialogue being in the present tense, although I didn't fully understand it, stops it feeling like a story and stops it feeling like a narrative and keeps it firmly based on the feelings of the event. And I think that's probably the most powerful way you can talk about feelings, because there's one thing showing it, but I never seen this type of literary technique on screen where it's being expressed in such a way. And as you said, the characters sometimes they almost not so much role play, but you're right, those scenes are a little bit like therapy, where it's almost like an exercise in an expression. I don't know, but yeah, I enjoyed thinking about this movie and talking about this movie and hearing your views on it. Oh yeah, and the other thing you said, which is, even though you didn't phrase it well, is by your own very words you didn't phrase it well. I thought you phrased it well enough. Is, yeah, these two actors are brilliant because they've got that level of gravitas and charisma that are stars, but at the same time, they're good enough actors that you can forget that they're stars and you can think for moments in this movie that you're actually just watching people in a room. And that is a hard balancing act to do. But yeah, good flick.
Hey man, just a gorgeous Monday afternoon here. Very perfect autumn weather, not a cloud in the sky, cold but dry. Yeah, lovely little intro into the week. I loved hearing your thoughts there. It sounds like we had a relatively similar experience with the movie, and I think you've articulated it very well. That you started off your voice note there saying that you didn't ever fully form an opinion on anything that you were seeing, but you really enjoyed trying to work out what you were saying. And that I think you said later in your voice note that you almost don't want to sully that by going and reading and like finding out, oh, actually it's supposed to be this, whatever. I'm now, how far am I? Maybe like 4 or 5 days removed, maybe 5 or 6 days even removed from watching the film. And I think it's quite telling that I haven't felt remotely compelled to dive into analysis, other people's analysis, or testimony from the director on what is the quote unquote truth of this movie. I, like you, think it's quite a special experience and it's quite a rare experience if you're watching movies, to not be able to kind of bottle it up and just like fully understand everything, tie a ribbon around it, but also really enjoy the film. Because you can certainly see movies that you can't make head nor tail of, but you don't really enjoy the film. It's more just like, well, that was a whole confusing mess. But that thing of like, I've got glimmers of this, that, and the other. I found it very engaging and compelling and beautiful and technically marvelous, but I don't know. But I've got enough to chew on. You know, it's not that it was just like pretty pictures, aesthetically pleasing. It is trying to get your head around it or trying to interpret what you're getting. If that's evoking a lot of really interesting thought, then that's a great place for a film to settle into. And I don't know if I'll ever see this film again, or if so, how many more films in my life, how many more times in my life I'll see it. But what I do know is I really enjoyed it the first time I saw it, and it was significantly deepened. It was a much more affecting film the second time. And I wonder, with a film that's so rich and textural and I would say open to interpretation, if one of the pleasures of this film is occasionally revisiting it and maybe seeing it in a different light. But yeah, all the different ways that you've talked about your experience of it, I would echo those thoughts. You mentioned the interesting use of the present tense in the way that some of the dialogue is written and how that comments on or evokes that reality, I suppose, that memory is a present thing. You know, if something happened to me 20 years ago that was traumatic or I don't know, like foundational to my personality or whatever it was, the memory of that thing is a present occurrence to me. I'm still living that thing today. So the way this film mixes the past with the present constantly is very true. It's very true to life. You talked about how flashbacks are often a bit jarring or just an unwelcome presence in a movie. I feel the same way. I very often hate flashbacks in movies. One of my ultimate pet hates, it might be my most hated trope in movies, and it happens much more in television. It happens in miniseries, particularly when we have these constant snatches of flashbacks to this critical moment in the protagonist's life, but we don't really get anything. We just get like a snatch of it. And over the course of the season or movie or whatever it is, we keep on going back to it. It's only at the end that we get the closure on that scene. And so though all of those individual little flashbacks only serve to go, something happened, something important happened, but not give you anything. And then at the end, it's like, you know, this must have been important because we've been showing you snatches of it for the whole movie. I absolutely can't stand that. But even the more classic flashbacks of like, okay, what's the best way to do this info dump? I guess we'll just literally go back and show it to you. It's often a bit like, why am I watching this now? Let's get back to like what's actually going on in the present day. Like, can we cut to the chase on this flashback? And the fact that this film is about memory to such a huge extent and about trauma to such a huge extent completely justifies the flashbacks, and they're just artfully done and yeah, artistically interesting, I think. So yeah, I really agree with everything you said in that regard. You talked about one's ability to empathize with someone else's trauma that you didn't experience, and that's another interesting theme in the movie. Again, I'm not like coming at this where like I have the film 100% concrete and codified in my head, so the observations I make about it are like completely perfectly crystallized things. It's more like I almost like I sense this about the film, I feel this about the film, and I do feel that like something I was thinking a lot about when I was watching film was one's ability to sort of translate your own trauma into someone else's via empathy. So she has no personal experience with Hiroshima. She has personal experience with another horrific event that was also part of the same war, even though on the other side of the planet. And she's off traveling, shooting a movie, other side of the planet, immersed in this, both this person that she's met, but also this city that have suffered greatly and have been put through the ringer in like appalling, like it's almost like incalculable ways, impossible ways. And she has as well. What's happened to her and what's been done to her and everything is like, you can't really ever get your head around. You can't fully bounce back from that. It's with you forever. And so does that mean she's drawn to that? Is she drawn to empathizing with that? Is she drawn to just being around that? Is she, it's an open question. And that's another just major theme of the movie. You mentioned the introduction of infidelity into the film and how that made you feel differently about them. And it's the same for me. I often find infidelity in movies and TV shows to be like a very mishandled subject matter, where it's just sort of like put in some flavor here or just make it seem a little bit more scandalous or something. It's interestingly done here. Again, I'm watching everything in this movie sort of flip-flopping back between taking them as literal people and this is a literal story, and taking them as allegorical stand-ins and stuff. So no like exact sort of terrestrial event or reference is being taken just purely on face value for me. But I think because the film is so much about themes and about countries and about the war and stuff like that, I'm less inclined to sort of judge a particular character or think of them in those purely human ways. It's a curious reference because it's really contained within that one scene. Neither of them seem conflicted about it. They don't mention their respective partners ever again or ever before. It's very localized there, and yeah, it does evoke certain feelings, but it seems very removed from the movie in a kind of general sense. And yes, it was Blue Jay I was referencing, not Blue Valentine. I loved that film, Blue Jay. I really, really liked it, but I can never for the life of me remember the name of it. I know it's called Blue something, but yeah, Blue Jay. Although Blue Valentine, it could certainly be another reference point, and I urge you to see it, but it's definitely a film about baggage, to say the very least. And then just like towards the end of your voice note, you're talking about how, just in reference to what I was saying about the possible nature of these characters, how the Japanese guy has a bit of a ghostly presence and he's kind of haunting her in a way. And that definitely came through for me. Again, I don't really want to read much about this film or anything because I really like my very vague and ethereal and undefined relationship with it and experience with it. So why pin it down more and maybe like close off some of those avenues of exploration? But maybe if I watch it again in the future, I'll maybe read up a little bit more on it and just kind of see what some of the existing perspectives are on it. I actually went to Hiroshima many years ago, and this film, in the early stages, she talks about going around the Hiroshima museum, and the film actually shows that in some amount of depth. And it's a peace museum. It's a museum to peace. It's what they call it. The film she's making, she says several times, is a film about peace, and we see the recreations and the parade, the banners about like anti-atomic bomb banners and stuff like that. And I remember going to that museum and finding it very affecting, and this could totally just be like, what's in your head, but I remember really liking Hiroshima and finding it to be a very peaceful city. Of course, I'd been to a peace museum, and it is a peaceful city. Like it's a quite quiet place, and it's interesting. Like I'm not in any way trying to like equate my experience with going to this place when it's like raw in the memory and it's like every single person has like just completely lived through it. But it is interesting going to sites of immense trauma and destruction and just feeling what does that do to a person? What does that do to a place? And that could be an individual person. It doesn't need to be an entire city. But when you commune with a person or a million people or wherever it is who have just gone through something unimaginable, it's like it's otherworldly in a way of like how does it feel? How do you meet them in the middle somehow? I don't know. It's murky and an undefined territory. I just know that I felt something there, and clearly you feel something when you visit sites of mass destruction. Again, could be an individual person who's been destroyed by some horrific events, whatever it is. But this film grapples with that in a really interesting way. And again, because it's somewhat vague, it's less like here's a film about the horrors of bombs and stuff like that. It doesn't feel that like it's lecturing to you. It feels like it's just talking about interesting themes. And of course, with even if you don't get that deep with it and you don't kind of read it in that symbolism kind of way, it's also just really compelling as a character drama between two people. So yeah, glad you had a really good time with it. I did too. And I'll probably will check out, like at least look up what other films this director has done, at least ones that are highly regarded, to see if anything kind of tickles my fancy.
Hey man, yeah, not much more to add, but just one thing to mention to you. So the infidelity conversation is had in isolation, but then later on, if I'm not mistaken, which I don't think I am because I seen it yesterday, they actually go to the Japanese actor, the Japanese guy's house, and it's actually mentioned about his wife. Where is she? She's out of town. I think I don't remember where he said she is, but she's away. And then the French woman asks about, is she beautiful? And he says, yeah, she is very beautiful. And I think then it's mentioned that they're both happy in their relationships, which I don't know in what way they're happy, but it is brought in again. And the other thing I forgot to mention is it's interesting to me that she confesses to a character who would have been on the same side of the conflict as Germany. So in a way, it's there's a connection between they've experienced defeat almost, and I'm not just talking about defeat in a war sense. There's a certain shame as well to go with that, but I don't know how much defeat you would feel on top of that when someone's dropped a nuclear bomb. But her German lover gets killed and dies, and imagine your German lover dies and the whole country is celebrating that they are defeated and that what they represent is defeated, and you had an emotional connection with somebody from the enemy. And although it's not like Japan invaded France, but at the same time there is a shared connection in terms of what side of the war they were on, and they both experienced being on the losing side. That brought extreme joy, narratively speaking, in terms of the newspapers and the press and the countries themselves, for France, America, England. So there's another element to this movie that she decides to confess her love and her feelings about this to somebody who is not an ally in the sense of their country and what they would have experienced. They're certainly the losers in terms of the war, but on top of that, they got a fucking nuclear bomb dropped on 2 cities. So that's a big aspect of it as well. So there is a whole type of thing. Forgetting is death, but also if you do forget, maybe you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes, both as a person and a country.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a testament to this, how thematically rich this movie is, that I didn't even really think about that. Yes, they're both on the losing side in a sense. I mean, France are not on the losing side, but she personally was kind of allied romantically, obviously not politically, with a German soldier. And, you know, the liberation of France has led to her great tragedy of her life. And then obviously his family and everyone he knows has gone through the bombing of Hiroshima. And I think there is clearly a huge shame element to this film. I don't know that much about Japanese history, but from what I've heard, when Japan lost the war, like losing the war, especially for the emperor, was like just such a incredible point of shame that they basically just threw away the whole imperial system and threw away warfaring, and were just like, every single thing that went into that play we're like done with, and now we're just like restarting again. So yeah, another sort of feather in the cap of this movie, or another thing you can be thinking about while you watch it, which is, again, just continuously impressive that there's so much that one can think about. And at the same time, I think it can be watched as a Blue Jay, as a two people meet, hang out for 24 hours, and that's your movie. It works on those grounds as well. So yeah, let's see what else I can find in the old Alain Resnais bucket.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.